Welcome, in essence, to Lecture 3, an addendum to the last lecture. In the last lecture, we talked about project scope, we talked about project charter, and we talked about statement of work. This is actually a little bit progression further from the last lecture, and so I want to clarify some things from the last lecture. So in the last lecture, I talked in depth about a statement of work and how it is used to get to a project scope. Well, this is kind of you have to pick and choose when you're doing your project management. And project managers with experience, they'll have some inkling as toward what type of approach they're going to use to manage a project. So there may be in a waterfall approach, there may be some aspects from a statement of work or a project scope to go to the project charter that will be used, and that might be different from the iterative and incremental approach. So with that said, the statement of work provides for developing the scope that further leads to the project charter. The project statement of work is provided for customers for external projects. Okay, so for this basis, that would be for giving potential bidders, customers, service providers, and so forth some information regarding what they might be bidding on. So here's some things that would go on a statement of work that you would provide to external people regarding your project. So you might give a project name, the justification and the objectives of the project. You might provide project deliverables, project boundaries, saying what's in the project and saying what's not in the project. You might identify key stakeholders to the project, and then you would discuss some of the constraints relative to the project. This might be very important to outside vendors and service providers, since there might be budgetary constraints that you have to live under, so they'll have to live under, and also there might be government and regulatory type of things to consider, and so you're trying to communicate that so they know up front what they're getting involved with. Further, there is assumptions. Assumptions are really a statement of saying this is how it is. This is the statement of reality. This is something that we are accepting as true without necessarily having to provide any proof that it is true. So this is what the criteria we are working under. You also need to have some type of acceptance criteria. That would be a communication to let the outside vendors know, okay, this is what we're looking for. Can you be able to provide this so we can get our project completed? You might also have to delineate or at least outline some type of project scope, and also have a project or a change management plan in case something happens, especially with iterative or incremental, where the scope of the project may change because you found out new information. The customers decided that they've seen some feature that you've provided, and they may want to tweak it and change it a little bit. So that would be a change management plan. Also, I mentioned project exclusions. That specifies or tells the workers or the third-party people, okay, so in a project exclusion, we're not expecting you to provide this service, and that would help them with their competitive biddings and things like this. And then you would discuss things that are dependencies. For instance, you can't start doing a home remodeling project if you don't have the carpet when you need to lay carpet, or you may need to have some type of certain furniture or even appliances that you want to install. Well, if it comes around that we want to put it in a certain time and it's not available, that would let you know that there's a dependency involved. Once again, and this may be a little bit redundant because I've already covered a little bit of this before, but a project justification, what might be involved with it. You would have a vision for the project, a situation statement, and also you might want to talk about the feasibility. You find this is feasible, and why it is feasible you're doing it. Also, your project objectives. Make sure that you want to use the SMART acronym, that criteria, to help manage expectations and help in the decision-making process. So deliverables, what are they? Deliverables can be internal, submitted to team members or collaborating department, or extended or external, submitted to stakeholders. Again, could be vendors, so forth. And typically, you might want to use a breakdown structure, either initially using some type of spreadsheet like Excel, and then further you might want to put that in, as a project manager, you want to put that in some type of software to keep track of the phases of the project. With the work breakdown structure, it groups tasks by project phases, determines which project tasks will produce deliverables, and assigns tasks with resources, labor, dollar amount, equipment, tools, times, and things of that nature. Provided here is an example of a work breakdown structure. This was developed in Microsoft Project, and it's for a home renovation project. It includes costs, resources, and time phases. So if you notice here, it's saying that the renovation it should take 35 days. It should occur or did occur between 8/4/23 to 9/21/23. Total cost was about $54,000. Here's outlining initiation of the project, the planning. It's going to take a day or so to do that. Then the execution will actually be on the 4th through the 21st. And so it's going to be installing carpentry. There's going to be plumbing. If you notice, it says about $6,400 is going to be cost of using the plumbers. The tiling or tile setting, evidently we're going to do that, so there's no cost involved, but we're outlining when we're going to do it and how long it's going to take place. Notice also that there's predecessors, so this is an indication of the dependencies involved with it. Notice that with electricity, that is going to cost about another $6,400, at least that's budgeted for it. And then putting kitchen, appliances, bathroom furniture, painting rooms, and so on and so forth, and that evidently leads to the about the $5,400 towards the project. There is project tracking involved, and that seems to be an ongoing process. And then also in closing out, and this would be having a closing meeting. There's probably acceptance criteria, check marking, did we do this, did we do this, is this acceptable, and so forth before the house is finished and they can turn it over to the customer. Project boundaries, those are the limits that define what's in the project and what's not in the project. It's established to help in the initiation phase. It provides measurable characteristics that ensure that everyone involved is working towards the same goal. More on project boundaries. Some examples of project boundaries include the project scope, what is and what's not of the part of the project, what should be delivered, and what shouldn't be delivered. The time is part of the boundary. It's in the slide that I showed with the schedule along with it. It's an indication it was 35 days. That's the time allotted to get this project done. Communications. I have talked, or I will talk about communication channels. And then personal space, it allows you to say, okay, we're going to need you to work these days during the time of the week. Also, if you notice on those schedules, a lot of the schedules are based upon 40 hours a week, so you're working Monday through Friday. Boundaries provide for expectations, collaboration, improve on stress, provide for stress management. They help you stay within the scope. The term scope creep means that you've set the boundaries of the project, but something happens and maybe the customer or a stakeholder or what have you decide, oh, well, we think this is a good idea and we'd like to include that. And you might say, okay, well, contractually, we've decided this is what the project is. If indeed you want more to this, that would be outside of the scope of the original scope of the project. So that's an example of scope creep. Helps with workload management and helps with professionalism. As before, I've talked about key stakeholders, so this you've already seen this on previous presentations, but you need to identify those key stakeholders to be able to keep them happy and develop a plan for communicating to them too. Next, project constraints. The big three project constraints are schedule or time, scope, budget, or costs. This is widely recognized. These are the three things that have to be considered when putting these projects together. Some other constraints are quality, resources, and risk. Another thing that needs to be considered for inclusion is the assumptions. Remember, assumptions are educated guesses or beliefs about some aspect of the project that needs to be iterated. It's considered to be valid if not concrete proof has been provided regarding it. Assumptions differ from constraints in that assumptions are what we consider to be true, whereas a constraint is something that will limit our project. So to manage assumptions, the project manager should ensure assumptions are based on facts. Monitor assumptions throughout the project in case something is changed and causes us to question whether what we assume to be true or operate off of is now changed. Identify and adjust to changes to assumptions if they occur, and then communicate problems, because directly if an issue has come up, that means that what we assumed would be okay or operate off of something has changed and has influenced it. Next, another thing that might be considered is acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria in project management are the specified conditions or requirements for a project deliverable that must be met to be accepted by the stakeholders. This is important, again, not so much with the waterfall, but definitely with incremental or iterative project management approaches. Some examples: a definition of ready, DOR, is used in an agile project. It's a checklist or a set of criteria that might be set forth before a team can start working on a task, a user story, or a deliverable, and I'll talk about user stories later on. It's used to ensure that all parties understand what needs to be done. So again, if you are providing this externally to potential vendors that might bid on providing you a service during the project, this is something to know. Another thing that needs to be talked about is the definition of done, and that means once you've gone through the checklist based upon the project backlog of the things that you've identified that need to be done toward a task to be able to move on to the next incremental phase or iterative phase. It's a quality initiative. So you also would provide that maybe to some external source for that reason. Another thing that might be included in a statement of work, especially for outside vendors to provide you services for your project team, you might want to include or at least state some change management or scope change management. A scope change is an alteration to a project scope, the detailed account of its necessities and the core characteristics of it. What is a scope control? Well, scope control manages scope changes, ensuring the project remains feasible. It provides regulatory conditions for the project manager and for those involved to understand what's going on with it. They provide a plan for implementation once something has changed and you've had to respond to it. It allows for margins in performance So you can accommodate if something's changed and maybe something that's happened and not necessarily good, bad, or otherwise, and no fault of anyone, and how you'll attempt to deal with it. And it provides standardized documentation to let everybody know, to communicate that a change has occurred and how you're going to respond to the change. Scope management's a methodology for inspecting a suggested change, documenting it, and then communicating it that some change has occurred. And it's for several reasons. For instance, insufficient definition of requirements, insufficient scope statement, market may have changed, government regulations may have changed, project site conditions, something weather related has influenced your project, and the client opinion or the client wants or needs may have changed, and they demand changes, and you have to respond to those. The next thing that might be included for a statement of work, especially for towards external sources and vendors, customers, things of that nature, is project exclusions. In project management, exclusions are items, tasks, or services not included in the project's scope of work. They provide boundary for everyone involved, boundaries for them. Exclusions are helpful for keeping project scope manageable, profitable, and contained, so scope creep doesn't occur. Management stakeholders, to manage stakeholders' expectations, to keep costs down, and to keep your project on time. Exclusions are often mentioned in project charter documents and project scope statements. From my experience taking the CAPM exam, there will definitely be questions regarding dependencies. So, what is a dependency? In project management, dependencies are the relationships between tasks requiring one task to be completed or started before another task. Explanation. Dependencies are important for keeping projects running smoothly and ensure that activities flow logically. They help the project manager keep an idea of what's going on with the project. And there's basically four types. There's finish to start, there is start to start to finish, and finish to finish dependencies. Okay, some examples. The project cannot happen without approval, funding, and project team development. The task A must be finished to finish task B. Deliverable A only works with deliverable B, and deliverable C can never be used with deliverable A. So that's a little bit more involved of a dependency, but there again, it's an example of a dependency. More regarding dependencies, two terms that you will encounter most likely from my experience taking the CAPM exam is the terms lead and lag. So lead is a unique concept that applies only to finish to start relationships. So if you're noticing on the diagram at right, you see here finish to start. Okay, so task B can only start after task A has finished. And then there is the lag dependency. Lag is not restricted by the type of relationship, so it can involve these other three types. It refers to the time delay between tasks when no resources are used. So these other dependencies, to make a visual, start to start, task B can only start when task A has started. So in other words, it'll start and then task B can start. They might start at relatively the same time, but you have to have A going before B. You have finish to finish. Okay, task B here in this diagram can only finish when task A has finished, and then start to finish. Task B can only finish when task A has started. With the end of this lecture, be knowledgeable of the 10 possible components of a project scoped, developed from a statement of work that is typically provided to those external to the project.